The recording was found floating in the debris field of what used to be the Zephyrian 7th Fleet. Among the twisted metal and scattered bodies of a once mighty armada, a single emergency beacon pulsed weakly in the void. Inside was a message that would change everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about the species called humans. The being who made this recording was Commander Vextol, a decorated veteran of 16 campaigns feared across 3 spiral arms for his tactical brilliance. He had never retreated from battle, never shown mercy to an enemy, never questioned an order from the High Command. But now, with his flagship burning around him and his fleet scattered to atoms, the greatest military mind of the Zephyrian Empire was about to reveal a truth so terrifying that it would make every species in the galaxy reconsider their place in the universe. To whoever finds this, his voice crackles through the static, each word heavy with the weight of absolute defeat. Know that what we faced was not an enemy. It was something far worse. It was humanity unleashed. What follows is the full account of Commander Vextol's final battle, recorded in his own words as his ship died around him. It is a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about war, about survival, and about what happens when a species that shouldn't exist decides to fight back. This is his story. This is the truth about humanity that the galaxy was never supposed to learn. Commander Vextol's claws scraped against the metal deck plating as he paced the bridge of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion. Through the massive viewport, the blue-white star of the Sol system burned like a baleful eye, its light casting harsh shadows across his scarred features. Around him, the bridge crew of the Zephyrian Empire's most feared warship worked in tense silence, their scaled fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed the approaching fleet in all its terrible glory. 300 ships, the largest armada ever assembled by the Zephyrian Empire, representing the combined might of 17 star systems. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons, carriers bristling with fighter craft, destroyers that could crack planets, and support vessels that stretched for kilometers through the void. It was a force that had conquered civilizations, that had brought proud species to their knees, that had never known defeat. And all of it was aimed at one small, unremarkable yellow star and the primitive species that called it home. "Status report," Vextol growled, his voice carrying the authority of one who had commanded fleets for 3 decades. His aide, a young officer named HFY, immediately straightened to attention. "All ships reporting ready, Commander. The human defensive fleet has taken position around their 3rd planet, just as intelligence predicted. 47 vessels, none larger than a light cruiser. Primitive fusion drives, basic energy shields, kinetic weapons, supplemented with crude missile systems." Kethfar's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among his species. "They're exactly what the scouts described, sir. Barely out of their home system, no real military tradition, no concept of true warfare." Vextol nodded, but something nagged at him. He had read the intelligence reports, studied the human transmissions that their deep space monitors had intercepted, watched the primitive entertainment broadcasts that leaped into space from their homeworld. By every measure, these humans should have been conquered generations ago by any spacefaring civilization. They were soft, weak creatures who spent their brief lives in internal conflicts over resources that could be found in abundance on 1,000 empty worlds. Yet they had spread to several planets in their system with a speed that impressed even seasoned military analysts. More puzzling still, their technology, while primitive by galactic standards, showed signs of rapid advancement that bordered on the impossible. In the span of a single generation, they had gone from crude chemical rockets to fusion drives that, while inefficient, actually worked. "Sir?" Kethvar prompted, and Vextol realized he had been staring at the tactical display for several minutes. "Proceed with the attack plan," he ordered. "Deploy fighters for initial reconnaissance. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with before we commit the main fleet." The order rippled through the armada. Across 300 ships, launch bays opened like hungry mouths, disgorging swarms of fighters that moved through space like schools of deadly fish. Each fighter was a masterwork of Zephyrian engineering, armed with particle beams that could slice through asteroid belts and shielded by energy fields that had turned aside the most desperate attacks of a dozen conquered species. Vextol watched the tactical display as his fighters approached the human defensive line. The humans had arranged their ships in what appeared to be a standard defensive formation, though their movement seemed oddly erratic to his experienced eye. Their ships would accelerate, then suddenly change course, then accelerate again in seemingly random patterns. It was as if they couldn't decide whether to advance or retreat. "Curious," he murmured. "What are they doing?" "Unknown, sir," his tactical officer replied. "Their movements don't match any known defensive doctrine. It's almost like they're confused." The first fighter squadrons reached engagement range. Vexthal expected the humans to open fire immediately, as any rational species would when faced with an overwhelming force. Instead, something unexpected happened. The human ship stopped moving entirely. For a long moment, the two forces faced each other across the void. 3,000 Zephyrian fighters, their weapons charged and ready, facing 47 human vessels that simply hung in space like dead metal. Vexthal frowned, his mind racing through possibilities. Were the humans surrendering? Had they realized the futility of resistance? Or was this some kind of trap? Then the humans did something that no tactical manual had ever prepared him for. They broadcast a message. Not on military frequencies. Not encrypted or coded or transmitted through secure channels. They sent it on every frequency simultaneously, in clear speech, so that every ship in both fleets could hear it. And what they said made Vexthal's blood run cold. Unknown vessels, the voice was calm, almost conversational. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We know why you're here. We've been watching your fleet approach for 3 days. We've analyzed your ships, your weapons, your formation patterns. We know what you're capable of, and we know what you intend to do to our worlds. Vexthal's tactical officer looked up from his console, confusion clear in his large eyes. Sir, how could they have been tracking us? Our stealth systems are active. There's no way their primitive sensors could have detected us at that range. We're not going to surrender, the human admiral continued. We're not going to run. We're not going to beg for mercy or try to negotiate. We're going to show you something that we've learnt about ourselves over the long centuries of our existence on this little blue world. There was a pause, and when the voice resumed, there was something different about it, something that made the scales along Vexthal's spine prickle with unease. We're going to show you what humans do when someone threatens our children. The transmission cut off. For a moment, silence reigned across both fleets. Then, the human ships began to move. But they didn't move like any military force Vexthal had ever encountered. They didn't form up into attack formations or attempt to maximize their firepower. Instead, they did something so tactically unsound that it took him several seconds to process what he was seeing. They scattered. All 47 ships broke formation simultaneously and began moving in completely different directions. Some accelerated toward the Zephyrian fleet at maximum burn. Others angled away at sharp tangents. A few simply stopped and began rotating slowly, as if they were tumbling out of control. What are they doing? Kethvar demanded. Sir, this makes no sense. They're abandoning any chance of concentrated firepower. They're making themselves easy targets. Vexthal was about to agree when his sensor officer called out in alarm. Commander! I'm detecting massive energy buildup from the third planet. Multiple sources all across the surface. On the main display, Earth began to glow. Not literally, but every sensor array on the Eternal Dominion was suddenly detecting enormous amounts of energy being generated across the planet's surface. Power levels that suggested industrial capacity far beyond anything their intelligence had indicated. Analysis, Vexthal snapped. Unknown, sir. The energy signatures don't match any known technology. It's almost like they're charging something very large. That was when the first human ship reached the Zephyrian fighter screen. It was a small vessel, no larger than a destroyer, moving at a velocity that pushed the limits of structural integrity. Vexthal expected it to open fire, to attempt some kind of desperate attack run against his superior forces. Instead, it exploded. Not from weapon damage, not because it had been shot down. It simply detonated itself in a massive fusion explosion that vaporized 3 entire fighter squadrons and sent shockwaves rippling through space. Suicide attack, someone shouted. But Vexthal was already studying the tactical display with growing dread. The human ship hadn't just exploded randomly, it had positioned itself at exactly the right point to maximize damage to his fighters while minimizing the risk to its own scattered fleet. A second human ship reached another part of the fighter screen and did the exact same thing. Then, a third, and a fourth. They're all doing it. His tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. Every human ship that makes contact is self-destructing. They're using their own vessels as guided weapons. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that each explosion was perfectly timed and positioned to cause maximum casualties, while the other human ships continued their seemingly random movements. What he had initially mistaken for panic and confusion was actually the most sophisticated tactical coordination he had ever witnessed. Each ship was moving independently, but somehow they all knew exactly where every other ship would be, exactly when each explosion would occur. exactly how to position themselves to avoid friendly fire while maximizing enemy casualties. It was impossible. No species could coordinate that precisely without instantaneous communication across vast distances. No military force could maintain that level of tactical awareness while engaging in what appeared to be complete chaos. But the humans were doing it anyway. In the span of 10 minutes, the Zephyrian fighter screen was cut in half. Not by superior technology or overwhelming firepower, but by an enemy that was willing to sacrifice itself with mathematical precision. Every human ship that reached the fighter formations died, but each death took dozens of Zephyrian fighters with it. Pull back the fighters, Vexthal ordered, his mind reeling. Reform at safe distance. But as his remaining fighters retreated, something else happened. The energy readings from Earth suddenly spiked to levels that made his instruments scream warnings. And from various points across the planet's surface, objects began to launch. Not ships. These were too small to be crewed vessels, too fast to be anything but missiles. But they moved with the same impossible coordination that the human fleet had displayed, accelerating at forces that should have liquefied any biological crew. Incoming projectiles, his sensor officer reported. Approximately, sir, there are thousands of them. Maybe tens of thousands. They're accelerating at over 200 gravities. Vexthal stared at the display as a cloud of death rose from the human homeworld. Each missile was moving faster than anything his fleet could intercept, and there were so many of them that they looked like a swarm of angry insects rising from a disturbed hive. "How long until impact?" he asked, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his veins. 18 minutes, sir. But, sir, these aren't targeting our main fleet. They're heading for the fighters we just pulled back. And suddenly Vexthal understood. The humans had sacrificed their defensive fleet not to damage his forces directly, but to push his fighters back to a predetermined position. A position where they would be perfectly vulnerable to a missile strike that had been planned and launched before the battle had even begun. The humans had known exactly how he would react. They had predicted his tactical decisions with perfect accuracy, had manipulated him into positioning his forces exactly where they wanted them, had turned his own military expertise against him, and they had done it by sacrificing their own people. As the human missiles closed in on his retreating fighters, Vexthal realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare was about to change. These humans weren't just willing to die for their cause. They were willing to die in precisely the right way, at precisely the right time, to achieve tactical objectives that no sane military mind should have been able to calculate. They weren't fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like equations made flesh. The first wave of missiles struck his fighter formations with surgical precision. Each impact was a small star being born and dying in the space of heartbeats. Where once there had been the pride of the Zephyrian fighter corps, there was now only expanding clouds of superheated plasma. And from Earth, more missiles were launching, thousands more, all aimed not at where his ships were, but at where they would be when the weapons arrived. In the space of 30 minutes, Vexthal had lost 70% of his fighter craft to an enemy that had willingly destroyed every one of their own ships to achieve their objective. And looking at the tactical display, at the waves of missiles still rising from the human homeworld, at the energy readings that suggested even more surprises waiting in the depths of space, he began to understand something terrible. The humans hadn't been defending their world. They had been setting a trap. And his entire fleet was sitting right in the middle of it. The silence on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was deafening. Around Vexthal, his crew stared at their displays with the kind of shocked comprehension that comes when everything you thought you understood about the universe suddenly crumbles. The tactical readouts showed the devastating reality. In less than an hour, the most powerful fleet in Zephyrian history had been reduced to a collection of damaged ships, struggling to maintain formation, while waves of human missiles continued to streak through space toward them. "Damage report," Vexthal commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Kethvar's hand shook as he read from his console. 68% of our fighter craft destroyed. 14 destroyers heavily damaged from debris impacts. 3 carriers reporting significant casualties from missile proximity detonations. And sir, he paused, his mandibles clicking nervously. The humans have stopped launching from their homeworld. But our deep space sensors are detecting massive energy signatures throughout their system. It's like their entire civilization just woke up. Vexthal studied the sensor data with growing unease. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. The asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planets was lighting up like a festival display, revealing installations that their intelligence had completely missed. Massive structures were powering up on the moons of the gas giants. Even the small rocky worlds closer to the sun were showing signs of industrial activity on a scale that suggested the humans had been preparing for this moment for decades. How is this possible? He muttered. Our scouts reported a primitive civilization barely capable of interplanetary travel. Where did all of this come from? His communication officer suddenly straightened. Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the humans. Same frequency as before, broadcasting to the entire fleet. Put it through, Vexthal ordered. The voice that filled the bridge was the same calm, conversational tone as before. Admiral Sarah Chen, speaking as if she were discussing the weather rather than orchestrating the destruction of an invasion fleet. I imagine you're wondering how we knew you were coming, she began. How we knew exactly when you would arrive, what formation you would use, how you would deploy your forces. The answer is simple. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. Vexthal felt his blood chill. There was something in that simple statement that carried implications he didn't want to explore. You see, Admiral Chen continued, when you've spent millennia perfecting the art of killing your own species, you develop certain insights into how intelligent beings make tactical decisions. We know how military minds work because we've been studying military minds since we first picked up rocks and used them as weapons. On the tactical display, new contacts began appearing. Ships rising from the asteroid belt, emerging from the shadow of moons, decloaking from positions that should have been impossible to hide in. They weren't large vessels, most no bigger than frigates, but there were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Every war we've ever fought has been a laboratory, the human admiral's voice continued. Every battle, every strategy, every tactical innovation has been tested against opponents who think exactly like us. We've learned to predict not just what an enemy will do, but what they'll do after that, and after that, and after that. We've built entire sciences around the study of warfare, because war is what we do best. More contacts appeared on sensors. These were different, stranger. Ships that seemed to bend light around them, making them nearly impossible to track. Vessels that appeared to be nothing more than massive engines with weapons strapped to them. Constructs that defied easy classification, looking more like geometric puzzles than spacecraft. But the real lesson, Admiral Chen said, isn't that we're good at fighting. It's that we never stop learning. Every enemy teaches us something new. Every defeat makes us stronger. Every victory shows us a new way to win. Vexthal realized his hands were trembling. On his display, the humans weren't just revealing hidden fleets. They were revealing hidden capabilities. Ships that moved in ways that violated known physics. Weapons that fired projectiles at velocities that approached light speed. Defensive systems that seemed to bend space itself around their vessels. The question you should be asking yourself, the human voice continued, isn't how we hid all of this from your scouts. The question is, why did we let you see what you wanted to see? And suddenly, horribly, Vexthal understood. The primitive ships his scouts had observed, the simple industrial bases, the apparent lack of military sophistication, it had all been carefully crafted theater. The humans had wanted the Zephyrian Empire to attack. They had made themselves appear vulnerable specifically to lure a fleet like his into their home system. You wanted us to come, he whispered. Of course we did, Admiral Chen's voice confirmed, as if she had heard him across the void. We've been watching your empire expand for the last 50 years. We've studied your tactics, your technology, your psychology. We know how you think, how you fight, how you conquer. And we've been preparing. The human fleet began to move. Not the scattered, panicked movements of their initial defensive force, but with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of absolute tactical superiority. They flowed through space like living things, each ship moving in perfect harmony with hundreds of others, creating patterns of movement so complex that Vexthal's tactical computer couldn't even process them. The truth is, Admiral Chen continued, we could have hidden from you forever. Our stealth technology has been centuries ahead of yours since before your species achieved spaceflight. We could have remained invisible, unknown, safe in our little corner of the galaxy. But that wouldn't have solved our real problem. What problem? Vexthal found himself asking aloud, though he knew she couldn't hear him. The problem, the human admiral said, as if answering his question, is that we're predators. We're apex predators, who evolved on a world that spent billions of years trying to kill us. Everything about us, from our binocular vision to our persistent hunting instincts to our pack coordination abilities, was forged in an environment where the only way to survive was to be better at killing than everything else around us. The human ships were closer now, moving through space with a fluidity that made Vexthal's own fleet look clumsy by comparison. But they still hadn't opened fire. They were just watching, studying, learning. And the terrible thing about being an apex predator, Admiral Chen's voice took on a note of something that might have been sadness, is that you need something to hunt. When we ran out of natural enemies on our homeworld, We started hunting each other. When we learned to cooperate enough to stop constant warfare, we turned our attention to the stars. Not because we wanted to explore, because we needed something to fight. Vexthal's sensor officer looked up from his console with wide, terrified eyes. Sir, I'm reading massive power buildups from the human vessels. But these energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. It's like they're using completely different physical principles. Your empire has given us the perfect gift, Admiral Chen continued. A worthy opponent. Species that have conquered dozens of worlds, that have perfected the art of warfare across multiple star systems, that represent a genuine challenge. Do you have any idea how long we've been waiting for something like this? The truth hit Vexthal like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just been preparing to defend themselves. They had been preparing to hunt. Everything they had done, every technology they had developed, every strategy they had devised had been aimed at one ultimate goal: finding and defeating enemies capable of interstellar warfare. His species, his empire, his entire civilization had been targeted not because they were a threat to humanity, but because they were worthy prey.
We studied your conquest of the Altharian worlds,
the human admiral said. Brilliant work. The way you used their own moon's gravity to slingshot your fleet around their defenses was inspired. We incorporated that technique into our own tactical databases. One of Vextal's tactical displays showed a replay of that battle. It had been one of his greatest victories, a textbook example of using environmental factors to overcome superior numbers. But now he was seeing it from a human perspective. And what he saw made his stomach turn. They hadn't just observed the battle. They had analyzed every decision, every maneuver, every tactical choice. They had dissected his greatest triumph, like scientists studying a specimen. We also learned from your pacification of the Zerian colony cluster, Admiral Chen continued. The way you used their own communication networks to coordinate simultaneous strikes across 17 worlds was educational. We've made some improvements to the concept. More tactical displays activated, showing battle after battle, conquest after conquest. Every significant military action the Zephyrian Empire had taken for the last 50 years had been watched, studied, and catalogued by human observers. They had been learning from his people's victories, preparing counters for every strategy, developing responses for every tactic. But the most important thing we learned, the human voice said, was patience. You see, we could have revealed ourselves at any time. We could have made contact, established diplomatic relations, maybe even become allies. But that wouldn't have taught us what we really needed to know. What? Vexthal whispered. How good you really are when you're fighting for your lives. The human fleet suddenly accelerated. Not gradually, not in the smooth curve of conventional engines, but instantaneously. One moment they were moving at standard cruising speed, the next they were traveling at velocities that should have turned their crews into paste against the bulkheads. But more terrifying than their impossible acceleration was their formation. They moved like a single organism, hundreds of ships flowing through space in patterns so complex that watching them made Vexthal's eyes water. It was like watching a mathematical equation solve itself in 3 dimensions. Open fire, he commanded. All ships engage at will. The response was immediate. Energy beams lanced out from 300 Zephyrian warships, particle cannons that could slice through asteroids, plasma weapons that burned hot enough to melt titanium, missile systems that could level continents. It was enough firepower to sterilize a planet, concentrated on the approaching human fleet. And it missed. Not because the humans had shields, though they clearly did. Not because they had some kind of defensive technology that absorbed the energy, though they might have had that too. It missed because the humans weren't where the targeting computers said they should be. Every ship in the human fleet had moved at exactly the moment the Zephyrian weapons fired, shifting position by just enough to avoid the incoming fire. Not random evasive maneuvers, but precisely calculated movements that anticipated exactly where each shot would go. It was as if they could see the future. Impossible, Kethvar breathed. How did they know where we were aiming? Because, Admiral Chen's voice said, and now there was definitely sadness in it. We've been fighting beings like you for our entire evolutionary history. Every thought you think, every decision you make, every tactical choice you consider, we've seen it all before. You're not our enemies. You're our teachers. And we've learned everything you have to teach us. The human fleet opened fire. What came from their weapons wasn't energy beams or projectiles. It was something that made space itself scream. Reality twisted around their ships as forces beyond Vextal's comprehension tore through the Zephyrian formation. Ships that had withstood the firepower of entire fleets simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, but somehow edited out of the universe. Vexthal watched in horror as vessel after vessel simply vanished from his displays. Not exploding, not burning, not even leaving debris. One moment they were there, the next moment it was as if they had never existed at all. "What are they using?" he demanded. His science officer looked up from her console with the expression of someone whose understanding of physics had just been shattered. "I don't know, sir. The energy readings suggest they're manipulating fundamental forces we don't even have names for. It's like they've learned to weaponize the structure of reality itself." On the tactical display, the human fleet continued its impossible dance through space. Each ship moving in perfect coordination with hundreds of others, their weapons reaching out to touch Zephyrian vessels with forces that couldn't exist. And with each shot, another piece of the most powerful fleet in galactic history simply stopped being. "This is what we are," Admiral Chen's voice said softly. "This is what happens when a species that spent 4 billion years learning to kill finally finds something worth killing. We don't just wage war, we perfect it. We don't just fight battles, we transcend them." Vexthal stared at his displays as his fleet died around him. In the span of minutes, 3 centuries of Zephyrian military might was being reduced to nothing by an enemy that fought like the very laws of physics were just another weapon in their arsenal. And the most terrifying part was that the humans were still learning. Even as they destroyed his ships, he could see them adapting their tactics, refining their techniques, becoming more efficient with every shot fired. They weren't just winning, they were evolving. Commander Vexthal stood alone on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, his command staff either dead or evacuated to the few remaining escape pods. Around him, the great warship groaned and shuddered as its structural integrity failed, systems cascading into failure one by one. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the remains of what had once been the pride of the Zephyrian Empire: twisted metal, burning atmosphere, and the cold vacuum of space claiming the lives of thousands of warriors who had believed themselves invincible. In the span of 3 hours, 300 ships had been reduced to 7. 7 crippled, dying vessels limping through space while the human fleet watched them with the patience of predators deciding whether their prey was worth the effort to finish off. Vexthal activated his personal recorder, his claws clicking against the device with trembling fingers. If nothing else survived this disaster, if no warning reached the home worlds, perhaps someone would find this testimony floating in the debris and learn the truth about humanity before it was too late. Personal log, Commander Vexthal, commanding officer of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion. He began, his voice hoarse from shouting orders that no longer mattered. Final entry. The Zephyrian 7th Fleet has been destroyed by human forces. What follows is my account of the battle, recorded for whoever finds this record among the wreckage. He paused, watching as another of his remaining ships simply winked out of existence, consumed by weapons that rewrote the fundamental structure of matter. The humans had stopped their coordinated assault 20 minutes ago, not because they lacked the ability to finish off the survivors, but because they wanted to study how Zephyrian ships died. Even now, in the final moments of his fleet's destruction, they were learning. "We came to Sol System believing we faced a primitive species," he continued. "Our intelligence was wrong. Not incomplete, wrong. The humans allowed us to see what they wanted us to see. They have been preparing for this encounter for decades, possibly longer. They have technology that makes our most advanced systems look like children's toys. But that's not the most terrifying thing about them." Through his damaged senses, he could see human ships moving through the battlefield, their strange geometries shifting and flowing as they examined the wreckage. Occasionally, one would fire a precision beam that would carefully carve sections from the destroyed Zephyrian vessels, taking samples for analysis. They were treating his fallen comrades like specimens in a laboratory. "The most terrifying thing," Vexthal said, "is that they've been hunting us since before we knew they existed." He thought back to the revelation that Admiral Chen had shared during the battle. The humans hadn't just been observing Zephyrian military actions for 50 years. They had been actively guiding them. Conflicts that the Empire had believed were the result of their own strategic planning had actually been orchestrated by human intelligence operations. The conquest of the Altherian worlds, the pacification of the Zerian colony cluster, even the expansion into the Outer Rim territories, all of it had been carefully nudged and influenced to create the exact kind of military force that would serve as the perfect test for human capabilities. The Zephyrian Empire hadn't been building a fleet to conquer the galaxy. They had been building a fleet to satisfy human curiosity about the limits of their own military prowess. "They've been using us," he whispered into the recorder. "Every battle we fought, every tactic we've developed, every technological advancement we've made, it's all been part of their research. We thought we were building an empire. We were actually building a test case. A new sound echoed through the dying ship, the hiss of an airlock opening. Vexthal turned, expecting to see the familiar form of one of his few remaining crew members. Instead, he found himself facing something that made his blood freeze in his veins. It was human. There was no mistaking the basic bipedal form, the forward-facing eyes, the predator's build that spoke of a species forged by millions of years of evolutionary violence. That this wasn't the soft, weak creature that Zephyrian intelligence had described. This was something else entirely. The human was tall, nearly 2 meters, with a build that suggested strength far beyond what their homeworld's gravity should have produced. But more unsettling than their physical presence was their equipment. The human wore what appeared to be a form-fitting suit that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, adapting to their movements with fluid grace. Their helmet was transparent, revealing features that were sharp and angular, with eyes that held an intelligence that was both ancient and utterly alien. "Commander Vexthal," the human said, their voice carrying perfectly through the vacuum despite the lack of atmosphere on the bridge. "I am Colonel Marcus Rivera, 3rd Human Expeditionary Force. I've come to speak with you." Vexthal stared at the human, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "How are you here?" "My ship's atmosphere is gone. The temperature is below freezing. You should be dead." "Should be," the human agreed, stepping further onto the bridge with movements that seemed to ignore the lack of gravity. "But evolution doesn't really care about should be, does it? It only cares about what works. And what works for humans is adaptation." As Vexthal watched in fascination and horror, the human suit began to shift and change, revealing glimpses of technology that defied understanding. Organs that shouldn't exist pulsed beneath the surface, suggesting modifications that went far beyond anything the Zephyrian Empire had ever attempted. "You're not entirely human anymore," Vexthal observed. "None of us are," Colonel Rivera replied. "We gave up being purely human about 300 years ago." "Oh, we're still recognizably the same species that first looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there, but we've made some improvements." "Had to, really, once we realized what we were going to face out here." The human moved to one of the functioning consoles, their hands dancing over controls that should have been completely foreign to them. Somehow, the systems responded, bringing up displays that showed the full scope of the battle's aftermath. 300 Zephyrian ships reduced to debris, and 7 dying hulks. "This wasn't a battle," Vexthal said suddenly. "This was an experiment." "Very good," Colonel Rivera said approvingly. "Yes, this was an experiment. The first large-scale test of our military capabilities against a peer-level opponent. We needed to know if our theoretical models were accurate, if our technological advantages would translate into practical superiority, if our tactical doctrines would hold up against an enemy with real experience." Vexthal felt sick. "You killed thousands of my people to test your theories." "No," the human corrected gently. "We killed thousands of your people to save millions of others. You see, Commander, your empire represents a problem that we've been struggling with for centuries. You're a successful expansionist species with significant military capabilities and a proven willingness to conquer and subjugate other civilizations. Left unchecked, you would have continued to grow until you became a threat to every other species in this region of the galaxy." The human's fingers continued to work at the console, bringing up star charts that showed the full extent of Zephyrian territory. Red indicators marked conquered worlds, subjugated populations, entire species reduced to slavery or extinction. "We could have simply eliminated your species entirely," Colonel Rivera continued, in the same conversational tone. "Our capabilities certainly allow for it. A few well-placed antimatter devices in your home system's star would have solved the problem permanently. But that would have been wasteful. Genocide is inefficient, and more importantly, it doesn't teach us anything useful. So instead you decided to destroy our fleet and cripple our empire," Vexthal said bitterly. "Actually, no," the human said, and there was something in their voice that made Vexthal look up sharply. "We decided to recruit you." The words hung in the space between them like a physical presence. Vexthal stared at the human, trying to process what he had just heard. "Recruit us?" "The Zephyrian Empire has developed some truly impressive military capabilities," Colonel Rivera explained. "Your tactical doctrines are sound, your technology is advancing at a respectable pace, and your species has demonstrated both the intelligence and the will necessary for interstellar warfare. You're exactly the kind of ally we need for what's coming." The human touched another control, and the display changed to show something that made Vexthal's heart stop beating. It was a star chart, but not of any region he recognized. The scale was enormous, showing not just local stellar neighborhoods, but entire galactic arms. And moving through that vast space, marked by indicators that pulsed with ominous purpose, were fleets that dwarfed anything the Zephyrian Empire had ever imagined. "What is that?" he whispered. "That," Colonel Rivera said quietly, "is why humanity has been preparing for war." The Devourers. A machine intelligence that has been consuming civilizations in the Outer Rim for the last 1,000 years. They're approximately 50 years from reaching this region of the galaxy, and when they arrive, every biological species in their path will face extinction.
Vexthul studied the display with growing horror.
The scale of the threat was beyond comprehension. Fleets composed of millions of vessels. Industrial complexes that spanned entire star systems. A wave of mechanical death that had already consumed dozens of civilizations. "The Galactic Council knows about them," the human continued. "Has known for centuries, but they've chosen to ignore the threat, hoping that it will somehow pass them by or that some other species will find a solution. We've decided to be more proactive." "By destroying every military force that might be able to help fight them?" Bextel demanded. "By testing every military force to see if they're capable of helping fight them," Colonel Rivera corrected. "Your empire was the first test case. You've proven that your species can adapt, can learn, can fight with honor, even when facing impossible odds. That makes you valuable." The human reached into their suit and withdrew a device that Vexthul didn't recognize. It pulsed with soft blue light, and when Colonel Rivera activated it, the air around them shimmered with some kind of energy field. "This is a choice, Commander," the human said. "Your empire can continue on its current path, weakened, crippled, eventually falling to the Devourers when they arrive. Or you can join us. Help us prepare for the real war that's coming. Learn from us as we learn from you. And if we refuse, then you'll die with the rest of the galaxy when the machines arrive," Colonel Rivera said simply. "But we're hoping you won't make that choice. You see, we've been studying your species for 50 years and we've learned something important about Zephyrians, your survivors. When faced with extinction, you adapt, you overcome, you find a way to win." The human gestured to the wreckage visible through the viewport. "This wasn't a defeat, Commander. This was a recruitment test. And you passed." Vexthul looked around his destroyed bridge, at the flickering displays showing the remnants of his fleet, at the stars beyond where humanity waited with technology and capabilities that redefined what was possible in warfare. Then he looked back at the human standing before him, offering alliance against a threat that could destroy everything he had ever known or cared about. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. Colonel Rivera smiled, and for the first time since the battle began, Vexthul saw something other than predatory calculation in a human's expression. He saw hope. "We're proposing that you help us save the galaxy," the human said. "And we're promising to teach you how to be the kind of warriors that even the machines will fear." As the Eternal Dominion continued its slow death spiral through space, Commander Vexthul made a decision that would change the fate of his species forever. He reached out and took the device from the human's hand, feeling its alien warmth pulse against his scales. In the distance, other human ships were moving through the wreckage, not to scavenge or bloat, but to rescue survivors. Zephyrian crew members who had expected death were instead being pulled from their dying ships and brought aboard human vessels, not as prisoners but as potential allies in a war that would determine whether biological life would survive in their galaxy. Vexthul activated his recorder one final time. "Supplemental log," he said, his voice steady for the first time since the battle began. "The human offer of alliance has been accepted. We will learn from them as they learn from us. And when the real enemy arrives, we will be ready." He looked out at the stars, where somewhere in the vast darkness, an ancient evil was moving toward them with mechanical patience. But now, for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something other than despair. He felt ready for the next battle, the real battle, the one that would decide the fate of every living thing in the galaxy.